The final stage does not announce itself with a declaration of war. It arrives with the quiet, bone-deep realization that the ultimate instrument of state power has lost its external purpose. It is the moment the gaze of great military machine, honed for decades to project force across continents, slowly pivots and turns inward. This is not about foreign enemies or distant battlefields. This is about the crumbling landscape at home. This is the terminal phase of collapse, when the institutions meant to defend the perimeter are summoned to police the ruins within. The stage for this turn is set not by a foreign power, but by the meticulous unraveling of every social and political thread that once bound the Republic together. Imagine the sequence not as a sudden coup, but as a grim, logical descent. It begins with the persistent failure of civil authority. Local police forces are overwhelmed, underfunded, and politically delegitimized. State National Guard units are perpetually activated, stretched thin from responding to rolling crises, from natural disasters amplified by decay to bouts of civil unrest that flare like wildfires in a drought. The requests for federal assistance become constant, desperate, and routine. The Posse Comitatus Act, that thin barrier separating soldier from police officer, begins to fray at the edges through 1,000 exceptions and emergency declarations. A governor, facing an insurrection he cannot control, formally requests federal troops to restore order. The president, facing a midterm election promising law and order, sees no alternative. The first combat units deploy onto American streets not as invaders, but as reluctant guardians under the banner of necessity. This initial deployment creates an irreversible precedent. The military, a culture built on hierarchy and mission, is now tasked with a mission for which it is profoundly ill-suited. Soldiers are trained to identify and neutralize enemies. Police are trained, in theory, to protect and serve a civilian populace. When the soldier's training is applied to the homeland, every civilian becomes a potential combatant. The rules of engagement designed for Fallujah are applied to Fargo. The inherent tension is catastrophic. The squad on patrol sees a suspicious gathering, a protest deemed unlawful by a nervous mayor, a projectile is thrown. In a war zone, the response is immediate and lethal. On Main Street, it is a tragedy that ignites the nation. The incident is broadcast in real time, fracturing into conflicting narratives. One side sees martial law, the other sees finally getting tough on chaos. The military itself is fractured, its unity poisoned by the same divisions tearing the civilian world apart. Now, witness the second, more profound fracture, the schism within the military's own ranks. The oath is to the Constitution, but the Constitution is now a contested document, its meaning argued by rival political factions, each claiming to be its true defender. A general receives orders from a civilian commander-in-chief that a significant portion of the officer corps believes are illegal or immoral. Do they obey? A colonel must deploy his battalion to disarm a militia group in a neighboring state, a group that includes former members of his own unit, men he served with in Afghanistan. Where does his loyalty lie? The enlisted ranks mirror the nation, a microcosm of its regional, racial, and political divides. When the mission becomes the pacification of fellow Americans, the chain of command does not break with a snap. It corrodes from within, unit by unit, soldier by soldier. Loyalties begin to localize, to commanders who share their worldview, to home states that declare federal overreach, to the small unit where trust is a matter of life and death. The United States military does not turn inward as a monolithic entity. It begins to fragment, its components aligning with the factions of the new Civil War. The logistics of this inward turn reveal its own horrifying logic. The military is the only institution left with the discipline, the supply chains, and the sheer manpower to manage a disintegrating country. When the electrical grid fails regionally, who has the generators and the engineers to restore critical nodes? The Army Corps of Engineers. When supply lines for food and medicine are cut by intercity warfare, who convoy trucks and the security to run the gauntlet? The Military Logistics Command. When the digital infrastructure collapses, who has the secure, satellite-based communication networks? The Armed Forces. The mission creep is inevitable. From restoring order, the task becomes sustaining basic civilization. Military bases become the new centers of power, fortified green zones in a sea of anarchy. Soldiers no longer just patrol streets. They oversee distribution of water and food. They guard power plants. They operate the last remaining reliable systems. The distinction between governing and occupying evaporates. The international repercussions are immediate and devastating. Adversaries watch the greatest military in history consuming itself in a domestic fire. Alliances shatter as nations scramble, realizing their security guarantor is gone. Forward deployed troops are recalled in panic, abandoning bases and allies overnight. The nuclear command and control structure enters its most perilous phase in history. The protocols for the authorization of the ultimate weapons rely on a stable, legitimate civilian chain of command. What happens when that chain is broken, when conflicting authorities claim to be the lawful government? The nightmare of loose weapons, of commanders making sovereign decisions with apocalyptic tools, becomes a clear and present danger. The turning inward of the military signals to the world that the American era is over, and the global scramble for what comes next begins in earnest, a scramble that will be violent and redraw every map. The psychological impact on the soldiers themselves is a tragedy within the tragedy. These are men and women who join to defend their country from external threats. They're pointing their weapons at their fellow citizens, ordered to dismantle barricades erected by veterans, confronting civilians who shout that they are the traitors. The moral injury is universal and crippling. There is no enemy to clearly hate, only a confused, angry, and terrified populace that includes their own families. Rate of desertion and mental breakdown skyrocket. Unit may simply refuse orders, not out of malice, but out of a profound ethical rupture, a conviction that this is not what they swore to do. The warrior ethos, carefully built over a career, collapses under the weight of an impossible, soul-destroying mission. In the end, the final stage of collapse is not marked by the defeat of the military. It is marked by its transformation and fragmentation. What was a unifying force becomes a collection of armed factions, some loyal to a remnant federal government in Washington, others to regional power blocs, still others to ideology or individual commanders. The technology of warfare, from drones to surveillance networks, is on the homeland, creating a surveillance state far beyond any previously imagined, but one without a sender, a panopticon operated by competing warlords. The F-22 Raptor, designed for air dominance against peer adversaries, finds itself providing close air support for a convoy trying to secure a suburban interstate. The nuclear aircraft carriers sit idle, their power projection meaningless, while the struggle is for control of river crossings and mountain passes within the nation's own borders. This inward turn is the point of no return. It signifies the absolute failure of politics, of dialogue, of the social contract itself. When the ultimate instrument of state violence is deployed domestically, the state has admitted it is no longer a polity but a battlefield. The dream of the republic is extinguished not by a foreign conqueror, but by its own protector, acting out of a grim, despairing necessity in a world where every other option has vanished. The uniform meant to symbolize defense becomes the symbol of occupation, and the citizen, once the sovereign, becomes either a refugee or a guerrilla in their own land. The collapse is complete when the walls built to keep others out are used to pen everyone in, and the sentries on the wall look not outward into the unknown, but inward at the dying embers of their own civilization, wondering, with their fingers on the